Is the argument from time travel.
Yes,
so what is the argument from time travel for God's existence?
Okay, so if you've are on Joe Schmidt's channel and see if you've seen his discussion with Alex Malpass on causal finitism, or you've been following the exchange, like those YouTube video debates between rationality rules and capturing Christianity, you're going to know about causal finitism. And really quickly, causal finitism is the idea that, roughly speaking, chains of cause and effect can't be infinitely long. They can only be finitely long. Causal finitism seems to imply something theism-like because, there's a first, the finite chain of cause and effect in our world. If causal finitism is true, it needs to originate with some uncaused first cause. So that seems really like theism's true. And okay, how do you motivate causal finitism? With these kinds of paradoxes that arise if you allow for the existence of infinite causal chains. A very common example is the Grim Reaper paradox. So the idea is you could set up Grim Reapers with a given command, like if you find Fred alive, then kill him. And you order them, you order them in a specific way. And if you have infinity of them, then you could produce a literal contradiction, P and not P. So, okay, you're looking at this paradox and you're saying, okay, how do I kill this paradox? How do I say that, like, how do I get around this impossibility? And what you can say is you could just be a causal finitist. If causal finitism is true, then this whole scenario is impossible because you can't have Grim Reapers. Now, what an interlocutor, or is there something you wanted to say?
No, I was good. I was just trying to follow along. You're good.
Okay. So what an interlocutor is going to want to say is that, hold on. Okay, we have these two propositions, okay? The Grim Reapers are commanded to act in such and such a way, and you have infinite Grim Reapers. And you can't have these in conjunction, because that produces a contradiction. So you can't have A and B in a contradiction, so we say B is impossible. But that's not how we look at philosophy. If I say Alice is taller than Bob and Bob is taller than Alice, that produces a contradiction. But when we look at that A and B producing a contradiction, we don't say B is therefore impossible. We don't say that it's impossible for Bob to be taller than Alice. We say that it's impossible for Bob to be taller than Alice and Alice be taller than Bob at the same time. So when we look at this Grim Reaper scenario, we shouldn't say that it's impossible to have infinite chains. We should say it's impossible to have infinite chains and have them follow these certain commands in this certain way. You could command finitely many Reapers to do that, and you could have infinitely many Reapers without this command, but you can't have infinitely many Reapers with this command. And that's what the interlocutor to a causal finitist would probably say. Okay, now what's the big objection to this? Well, pretty much that this seems really mysterious. It like commits you to these weird mysterious forces, because like, say I have infinite Reapers lined up and they're all really obedient, so I'm about to give them the command about how to kill Fred. If I do that, I'll literally violate the laws of logic. So what happens? Something's got to happen. Like I have to slip on a banana peel, or maybe I have a brain aneurysm. Something's got to happen so I don't actually give that command. And it seems really mysterious. Like I could get really close to giving that command, but something's got to swoop in and stop me from doing it. Otherwise, the laws of logic are violated. Okay. And, the interlocutors, the causal finitists, will push back on this, but I'm just going to move on to time travel. Time travel produces famously lots of paradoxes on its own, and causal finitism doesn't help you there. If I go back in time and kill my grandfather, then my parents never existed, so I never existed, so I never killed my grandfather, therefore contradiction. Okay, how do you kill that paradox? Well, maybe you could go the same mysterious force route. Like it's impossible for me to time travel, but just not possible for me to kill my grandfather I just slip on a banana peel or something. You'd have this mysterious force. And I'm thinking about this. I'm like, hey, I believe in mysterious forces. I believe, God exists.
Yeah.
Maybe God can play the role of those mysterious forces stopping those paradoxes. So to spell that out a little bit more clearly, the causal finitist is going to say, here's my metaphysical principle. Infinite causal chains are impossible. And okay, I'm going to give my metaphysical principle. God really hates paradoxes, so he's always going to stop them. I'm going to call, I call this kind of view modal maximalism, because it really doesn't commit you to anything besides the existence of God. Like if you take modal maximalism, that God's the one who's stopping these paradoxes, then you could believe in infinitely long chains, or you could believe in time travel, And it's like, well, what about these paradoxes? Would they ever happen? No, they wouldn't ever happen. God would stop them. And some objections, mostly by Joe Schmid. I emailed him about this, and he gave me his thoughts, which were very helpful. His first objection, I struggle to really grasp it. It's that modal maximalism dresses up as an explanation, but it doesn't really give an explanation to why these are impossible. And I don't really get that, because like I could give a very similar kind of way that you would use the modal maximalism type explanations for in a case which we would agree that something is being explained. Like, we're theists. We probably don't believe in gratuitous evils because, God is going to make sure that all evils are ultimately justified. So then I have to, explain why are gratuitous evils impossible? And I could say, well, God hates gratuitous evils and he's omnipotent, so he's always going to stop them. And what that would mean is that, like, if there was a button that if I pressed, it would make a gratuitous evil, God's like, I can't ever actually press that. Like, I'd slip on a banana peel or I'd get a brain aneurysm before I could press it, because God's always going to make sure that I can't actually cause a gratuitous evil because he hates them. Okay, I just do the same kind of explanation for modal maximalism. Why can't I do why can't I cause a paradox? Well, because God's going to stop me. He's going to make sure I slip on a banana peel or something. He just hates paradoxes. Now, okay, is this better or worse than causal finitism? Well, causal finitism, it commits you to some stuff. It commits you to, say, the finitude of the past, or on some accounts, a discrete theory of time. It commits you to a ton of stuff, whereas modal maximalism, it doesn't commit you to any of that. That's why it's called modal maximalism. You could, in your modal space, you could have whatever you want there. You could have time travel. You could have whatever kind of time you like, just whatever you want. And whenever there's a possible world that is going towards a paradox, it's stopped because God necessarily hates paradoxes. Okay, well, is this more or less economic than causal finitism? Does it commit me to more things? Well, you do need to realize, like, it commits you to the existence of God, modal maximalism. But what the causal finitist is trying to show through their arguing for causal finitism is that there is a God. That's what their causal finitism is trying to show. So if that's the case, then the proponents of causal finitism are arguing for a view which entails the existence of God. Okay, so then that means that my view isn't any more or less, it doesn't entail you to, it doesn't commit you to anything more than standard causal finitism, because modal maximalism just has it built, like cuts out the middleman of all this stuff about finite causal chains and just brings you to the existence of God and uses that to answer why there aren't any paradoxes. Now, the most devastating objection, which I don't think actually goes through in my books, is like the one that has the most weight to it. I don't think it actually devastates anything, but the one that has the most weight to it is that it makes the law of non-contradiction dependent upon God, because it's God who's doing these things to stop all these contradictions from happening. So the fact that contradictions don't happen is dependent upon God, but the law of non-contradiction can't depend on an agent. Now, some theists deny that. Some theists think that, the law of non-contradiction can totally depend on an agent, but I'm not one of those theists. Well, what I'm going to say is, like, okay, you look at all the broadly logically possible metaphysical theories. You got naturalism over there. You got, you got theism over here, and you got other forms of theism, other forms of naturalism. You got all these different broadly logically possible metaphysical theories. Now we go to the modal maximalism one. Under this theory, causality, in its very essence, is something which depends upon God. So what you're going to have to do is, when you look at this, you have to imagine, for this paradox to happen, you have to cut God out of the picture and his actions for the paradox to actually unravel. But that's not really a problem, because, like, we already know that causality in its essence is something that depends upon God. So when we take God out of the picture and we get contradictions, that's totally expected. It's not because law of non-contradiction is dependent upon God. It's that this metaphysical theory is interwoven